The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. Here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate fronts. The country's unemployment rate remained steady at 4.8% in February, but saw an increase in the actual number of jobless Filipinos. Fresh data from the Philippine Statistics Authority show that 2.47 million Filipinos were unemployed in February. That's higher than the 2.37 million Filipinos logged in the preceding month. Meanwhile, underemployment in the country eased at 12.9% in February. That's equivalent to 6.29 million Filipinos looking to work more hours or an additional job. The latest figure is lower than the 14.1% or 6.65 million underemployed Filipinos recorded in January. National statistician Dennis Mapa explained that the unemployment rate remains steady despite an increase in the actual number of jobless Filipinos as more Filipinos joined the workforce.
So, mayroong dagdag sa labor force participation. Substantial portion sa kanila ay nakahanap ng trabaho, but unfortunately, there is a portion na hindi nakahanap ng trabaho din. So that constituted the increase in the unemployed persons, and the unemployment rate was basically the same dahil mataas yung ating labor force participation rate. So in simple explanation, hindi lahat ng nag-join sa labor force ay na-absorb ng ating labor market na nagkaroon ng trabaho.
It's back to work for millions of Filipinos who took some time off during the Holy Week break. And here to chat with us about how the hotel sector's performance, we have on the show Sir Benito Bengzon, Executive Director of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association. Good morning, Sir Bong, and thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Diego, and thank you for having me in your program.
Yes, Sir Bong, the Holy Week just finished. How did the sector perform during this peak season? Were all the rooms of your hotel members fully booked?
Overall, the hotels and resorts did very well during the Holy Week. Remember, this is the first Holy Week since the pandemic, where travel restrictions have been completely relaxed. So people were able to move around. We saw a lot of movements, particularly to the resorts and the beach destinations. But we also saw a few, who decided to stay, in the hotels in Metro Manila. But overall, good occupancy for the resorts, good occupancy for the city hotels.
Sir Bong, given that this is officially the first Holy Week after the pandemic, could you say now that it's over that revenge travel will still remain a thing or a trend?
We believe that revenge travel will continue for the next several months. Filipinos who have been cooped in their homes over the last couple of years are now moving around the country and also abroad. And we see this as continuing, like I said, in the next several months because travel now is seen as a necessity, no longer a luxury. So this would be good for the hotels, the resorts, and other tourism enterprises.
Sir, have the occupancy rates of the hotels returned to pre-pandemic levels, given all these factors that we were talking about, like revenge travel and east restrictions?
We talked to some of our member hotels the last 2 weeks, and we asked them what the performance is in terms of occupancy, and in terms of what we call ADR, average daily revenue. And many of them are saying that they're back to pre-pandemic or to 2019 levels. So I think this is a good sign. Of course, we are still awaiting the return of our major foreign markets, particularly Korea, China, and Japan. But right now, they're doing very well. Even the restaurants or the outlets are getting very good revenue, especially last Easter Sunday, the buffets were full, and again, this is good news for our hotels.
And sir, what are the favorite destinations of local and foreign tourists? Are these like the usual suspects like Boracay, Palawan, Bohol? What are the other destinations you think, sir, should the government promote more?
You're correct, Diego. We're still seeing large numbers of travelers to the traditional holiday or beach destinations like Bohol, Cebu, Boracay, and Palawan. But we're also seeing some movements to relatively newer destinations, no, Siargao, Baler, no, many parts of Ilocos, and even in Eastern Visayas, no, Region 8, no, Leyte and Samar. So I think this is good because in the case of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association, we would like to see a more equitable distribution of tourist movement across the country.
Speaking of tourist movement, have you monitored, sir, an uptick in foreign guests? And from which countries do these foreign tourists come from?
At the moment, the biggest number of travelers is coming from the Balikbayans, no, particularly from North America. But we're seeing already many groups, no, coming from Korea, from Japan, and even from long haul markets, no, in Europe, no, particularly UK, Germany, and Italy. I think everybody's eagerly awaiting, no, the return to pre-pandemic levels of international flights, and of course, we look forward to welcoming back the foreign markets.
And overall, sir, this 2023, how is this sector performing? You see a full recovery?
Well, for the hotels, like I said, many of them are already back to pre-pandemic levels. I think if you really want to accelerate recovery, we have to get the international airlines to restore their flights to pre-pandemic levels. Certainly, the situation in Ukraine remains a big challenge, particularly for long-haul travelers. But overall, the situation looks bright. We in the Philippine Hotel Owners Association are quite optimistic that full recovery will start by this year.
And speaking of pre-pandemic levels, you said now this year we hope to see a full recovery and things are looking good. But how about, sir, the employees, hotel employees that were laid off during the pandemic? Have they been asked to return to work already?
Many of them have returned, no, to the hotels, to the resorts, no, and other accommodation establishments. Admittedly, there are a few who decided to move to other companies, no? But I think overall we're seeing a big number of workers coming back, and again, this is going to be crucial, no, in our recovery efforts because we need highly competent, qualified, experienced frontline personnel.
And finally, sir, any forecast on the number of foreign tourist arrivals this year? Do you see a higher number as compared to pre-pandemic, or are we going to hit the same numbers pre-pandemic?
We were doing about 8.2 million foreign visitors in 2019. We are closely monitoring the forecast and the reports coming from the Department of Tourism. But I think overall, 2023 will be a much better year than 2022. As to whether or not we will reach 8.2 million, that will depend on a number of factors. But I think what's important is that as an industry, we are working, no, collectively to make sure that the Philippines remains a prime, attractive, and competitive destination.
Thank you for your time, Sir Bong Benito Bengzon, Executive Director of the Philippine Hotel Owners Association.
Thank you.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Diego Castro. Central Bank Governor Felipe Medalla is not ruling out the possibility of pausing rate hikes if inflation further slows down. That and more in this Bloomberg interview.
If the numbers in April, because two birds don't make a spring, right? So maybe we need three birds, one more data point, which is April. If the April data points are consistent with the last two data points, maybe it's time to pause, because we're not as worried now about the currency depreciating, because it's actually has strengthened quite a bit.
So, Governor, does that mean if you get another negative print in April, that's not enough to make you comfortable with a pause? How negative does it have to be? And are you more worried about the strength of the demand side still?
Well, yeah, that's right. Of course, that GDP numbers were surprisingly high. So that means for last year. So that means demand is also strong. But we think that the increase of 425 basis points has done enough already to eliminate the excess demand.
Of course, a lot of the outlook has been made murky about what we've seen in terms of some of these global banking crises. I'm curious as to how you feel about Philippine banks, and do you feel that they're well capitalized at this point?
Okay, I've often asked that question: is the large rise in Philippine policy rate will create another Silicon Valley Bank in the Philippines? And the answer is no. We look at the bank balance sheets; they're very strong. And besides, our bond market has relatively short tenors. Now, we don't have 30 years, so the losses from the high interest rates, high policy rates, is much smaller than in the United States, which is coming from zero, right? So, in that sense, we are not, that high policy rates will cause financial instability is not a concern in the Philippines.
Well, that's a good news for the Philippines, Mr. Governor. I want to ask you a couple questions, though, about rates. You've hiked 425 basis points since May of last year. Do you think you're getting close to the peak? Are you getting to your terminal rate?
Well, as I said, if the April print is consistent with February and March, maybe we have peaked. But it's hard to speak too soon, because it has happened before. It's like a basketball game. You celebrated too early, and the ball was stolen. So
we've seen a lot of those in U.S. March Madness. That's for sure. It happens all over the world. So in terms of then, when you get to that pause, there's always this. All central banks are asked this question now. Do you pause and start looking to cut? Or do you pause, and is your message, no, we're going to keep the rate high for a considerable period of time?
For a pause, then it's one more observation point. But for a cut, maybe 5 more?
Pardon me, 5?
We have to be more confident that the low month-on-month is really now the central tendency.
Do you think that you're going to cut the reserve requirement by the end of June, as you've signaled in the past?
Yes, because the only reason we're not cutting the reserve requirement is we don't want to confuse the markets, which is, why are you cutting the reserve requirement when you're raising rates? But that confusion will be gone if we pause. Therefore, that gives us time to cut the reserve requirement.
The country's economic growth may have slowed sharply in the first quarter of the year. Makoto Tsuchiya from Oxford Economics said gross domestic product likely expanded by 4.4%. That's much slower than the 8.2% a year earlier and 7.1% in the fourth quarter of 2022. Tsuchiya attributed this to the slowing momentum for private consumption amid high inflation rate. For ING Bank's Nicolas Mapa, elevated borrowing costs and muted support from government spending also come at play. Miguel Chanco of Pantheon Macroeconomic, meanwhile, cited weaker exports and slower pace of remittances. And those are the top business stories of the hour. I'm Diego Castro. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News. All sides, all the time.